Jack, I really absolutely appreciate this and really look forward to our conversation. So it was perfect timing with everything. There are major changes that we are making here at GBBR, and we're disrupting the market here with what we're doing. But the simple reality is we know we have to move our board into position to withstand all these changes. And we are choosing not to wait and react. We're going to be very proactive with everything we're doing right now. We have to. We don't have a choice.
Yeah. I think everybody in the association world has to take a hard look at what they're doing and how it provides value to their members.
That's exactly it.
That's where we are.
Yep.
So,
well, I'm very excited about this, Jack, and I've known you for quite a while and been involved with T360 in a number of different capacities, mainly the summit, but also, if you recall, we used T360 to put that major merger of MLSs together up in Canada.
yeah.
And it would not have happened without the guidance to make that work.
Yeah, it was a very important project, and it honestly kept growing in Canada. There's been further consolidation up there, so we felt very good about helping with some of the first big mergers in the Canadian market. And then, I think we have about 15 of those going on right now in the U.S. that we're at some stage in. So it's a fun time to be in the industry because people are now open to these conversations, and it's rewarding to see that we've been talking about, hey, we don't need as many MLSs, and we're now below 500, and that's a milestone. We still have more to go, and T3 is doing everything we can to help those conversations where it's appropriate. Not everybody should merge, but there's a lot of places where it makes sense.
I remember the conversation at, I think it was Coronado Island. You had the summit, and I think it was about 700 MLSs at the time.
That's right.
So a dramatic change in that short period of time.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, we're like I said, we were. I mean, I remember it distinctly going from 700 to mid 600s to low 600s, and then really over the COVID, since 2019, we saw an acceleration of activity there. And there's still some states that have some pretty big challenges. I live in Texas, and Texas has, I think we have 37 MLSs, of which I want to say, it's a lot of MLSs, and there's many very small. It's a big rural state, so we have a lot of micro MLSs that are under less than 400 subscribers. And I don't know how you run anything with 400 subscribers. It's just a really tiny thing. So there's, and it isn't that it's bad to be tiny. I think the associations and actually in the local market context in those rural areas actually provide a lot of value for their members because that's their touchstone. That's who they go to for things. But the data services and the technology services and things like that, it makes less and less sense, to run a little tiny service for 400 subscribers. It's a lot of infrastructure to set up run an MLM.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know you quite well, and Stefan and a number of your team, but will you share a little bit about you and your background and your relationship with T360 for us?
Sure. Yeah, that's fantastic. This is now John, this is my 25th year in the industry. I started in the industry. I was in tech in the 90s before. And so I learned the industry inside of the kind of franchise broker world, became a franchise owner, investor in their system, helped open up the Minnesota markets with some partners, and really learned the business through that lens of a national franchise, a high growth national franchisor. It was an interesting time to enter the industry because IDX was new. The portals all came online a few years later. In terms of having many competitive options in portals. So learned it there. I've done consulting in the industry going back to 2005. I left corporate and started consulting with brokers on launching and building their businesses, mostly with Keller Williams brokers. and I started working with teams. So I spent about 3 years running an independent consulting practice that was affiliated with the national franchise, and worked with probably about 300 broker owners in that system to either launch or relaunch or do things to move their business to growth stage. And then along the way, I started working with teams, and I found that there was a lot of opportunity to work with teams. One of the teams that was a client of mine recruited me to be their chief technology officer. And so I left full-time consulting. I still did some consulting, but joined a team here in Austin called the Good Life team. That was a team that had been at Keller Williams and spun out as an independent brokerage. So I spent about 2009 to 2013 actually as an operator. And so I got licensed, I sold real estate, I did the job. And that was in many ways just a really incredible part of my career, where I had been working in the management layer and in the franchise infrastructure. And then I got hands-on and listed and sold properties, managed all of our leads, built a lead team, built a ton of our own technology when we were at Good Life team. When the iPad launched, we adopted it as our operating platform. So we taught agents how to use their iPads, and had a really creative, hands-on experience in residential real estate brokerage there, and it was great. It still informs me today. I still think about what an agent thinks about that's at the table with a seller, or how do we make a process that I know brokers have more efficient, that kind of thing. And then in 2013, Stefan and I started talking. In 2012, I attended Stefan Swanepoel's first T3 summit. And it was the very first one. I spoke at that summit, and then he and I'd been reading his books for years, and we started discussing starting a national management consultancy that's dedicated to the real estate brokerage industry, that did many things for our clients. And that was the goal of kind of joining with Stefan, was to build a sort of a McKinsey or a Boston Consulting or an Accenture, like a company that, when a broker or a franchise or a MLS or an association or a technology company, has a challenge in our space, that we would have the right people to do it. And so it was for a while, it was just Stefan and I and a few junior staff, and we did all the work together, and that was fantastic to do that. And then we started recruiting and building a true kind of professional services and management consulting team, in addition to continuing to write and publish about the industry. Stefan, when I joined him, had already written 50 some odd books about the industry. So we continued to write together. And so I've written for the Swanepoel Trends Report for many years. I helped edit the Danger Report, and have helped create the Real Estate Almanac, which is our comprehensive directory of kind of the who's who in the industry: leaders, MLSs, associations, brokers, kind of tech companies, everybody that is a who's who. And just worked with Stefan to build that. Continue to run our T3 Leadership Summit, have grown that to a significant C-level executive summit that's invite only, and still, I think, has some of the best content for the industry, because it's a closed door CEOs talking to CEOs conversation. So that's just that's it in a nutshell. Today we're about 40 people full time. We have consulting lines in every part of residential real estate. We do brokerage, franchise, tech, MLS, prop tech. We work in all those different areas. We do executive placement. We do some event management for some of our clients. And we also started a news division about 4 years ago, realestatenews.com, which has become a very popular news site for the industry, with just clean journalism, very similar to our reports. It's objective. It's not pay to play. We write about what we think is important in the industry, and the news team has that exact same directive, where they're here to tell practitioners what's really going on in the industry and what's meaningful, what they should pay attention to. So that's my history and a little history of the company in a nutshell.
Well, it's a great history, and it is timely, because the Danger Report that you mentioned really foresaw everything that's happening today.
Yeah, I pulled a copy from our archive. So yeah, this was a pretty incredible document when you read it from the perspective we have now. And that's when you find something like this, you're like, wow, there's a lot of this stuff that's really accurate. So, but yeah, there's a fun report. It's fun to go back and look at it again and see has come true. Did you guys get the follow up to that? Was the opportunity report, which we released 2 years ago? So
No, we don't have that.
yeah, so this is available at theopportunityreport.com.
Okay.
So we had talked to this report was the danger report was a report we did in conjunction with the National Association of Realtors. You can see their logos in the corner there. So they sponsored this research, and then we approached them a decade later and said, hey, I think we should update that report. But of course, they were in the middle of some things in the last 2 years where they said maybe we don't want to do a big industry report right now, and so we let them off the hook. And so we worked with Homes.com to sponsor this research. And very similar framework. We interviewed about 50 executives in industry and did some survey work and kind of collected the gathered intelligence of the industry into a singular report. And so this one is still available at theopportunityreport.com. You can download it. It'll take you to a downloads page. You go to that URL. And then the other thing I'll tell you that's fun about this report is in this report, we said, okay, we've done one of these reports before, which was the danger report, and we gave it to AI to analyze our prior report and tell us how accurate whether it was accurate or not. And the AI analysis of it found that we had an overall accuracy in the high 80s for that. And then there's some things in here that we said, there's going to be marginal agents are going to harm the reputation of the industry. So it graded at 85%. And I think the lawsuits are part of what we learned that was for real. And then other ones that were very high. New business models go mainstream. So at the time in 2015, we were looking at the EXPs of the world and some of the new cloud-based models. That was a 90% accuracy score that they really have gone. I would say that's probably actually 100%. I think the AI has rated it a little bit low, but it was fascinating to have the analysis of how accurate a report we had written 10 years earlier was for the industry.
Well, the danger report's on my shelf in my office as well. I provide the trends report for our leadership, but I will make sure we get the opportunity report, because you talk about the summit, and what's interesting about that, I find it fascinating because your decision makers are on stage.
Yeah.
But it's not just the decision makers, it's how you and Stefan push the envelope with them. And you get them to talk. And it was fascinating to watch you and your dialogue with Robert Rifkin a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that was pretty. It was spicy, but spicy in a good way, like a good New Orleans gumbo, where it makes it for a tasty meal. So I think that one of the differences with our event is that we really frame it as an executive conversation. The people that attend they lead brokerages, they are in leadership of their association, their MLS. They're in some kind of leadership or management capacity. So we get to have a little different altitude of conversation, and then we really try to press people on, what do you think? Why do you think it is? Why do you think things are this way? What's your position? How do you back it up? What is the underlying fundamental argument or basis that you have made your claim about? And we did that with Robert, and like you said, pushed on him a little bit about some of their very public stances on listings and control of listing, distribution and marketing, and private listing networks, which are a topic the industry's been obsessed with, largely due to Robert and Compass's initiatives in those areas. But I think now there's other voices as well that are talking about private listing networks and broader topics. So but yeah, we got into it. Got into it with Gary Keller. Got into it with Varun Krishna over at Rocket, and really and asked almost every leader on that stage. We said, "Tell us your stance. Tell us why." And I think it made for a very dynamic conversation across the group of leaders we had on stage this year.
So, your postmortem from the event, with all of the leaders on stage, what are you taking from this of the future in the next 2 to 5 years, of what they are saying to you and how it's going to affect our association, or how our members conduct their business.
Yeah, I think there's two conversations happening that are sometimes being conflated. And I said this on stage kind of at the end of our summit because we listen to a lot of different people talk about this topic. So there's the question of what is good for the consumer, what's good for my client, what is good for as a listing agent, what's good for my client, as a buyer's agent, what's good for my client. So I think there's a very robust conversation about what is good for the consumer. And then there's another conversation which is really about who makes the rules. Like who, if the National Association of Realtors is out of the rule-making, rule-enforcing, they're more in a kind of advisory sort of role now. They're not coming to MLSs and saying, hey, you're not following clear cooperation, so we're going to pull your insurance, right? They're not acting as an enforcement, and they're just providing guidance, right? So that's a different regime, and Nakia was on our stage and she said, look, people need to have the autonomy in their local markets to make decisions about what is the fit for their local marketplaces. And so I think there's a real question now about who is the rule maker, the rule enforcer, and how do we come to the decision about who that is on a market by market basis. So I think those are the two conversations. They're both fascinating conversations and have a lot of depth to them, and in some cases have some data to them about, especially on the consumer side. And we've got competing studies and a lot of pretty robust information about like what is good and what produces better results, and then where do people want to exercise their rights or their freedoms to maybe not market in certain channels, right? So I think that was our takeaway. Is like big conversations, both of them are important, and then at some point, I think every local market leader, every association leadership team, and working with their MLS will need to make a decision about what are the rules, how do we have a fair play field for all the brokers in our market where everyone feels like they are being well served by the MLS, maybe not constrained to marketing programs they want to run, but also doing right by the consumer, right? So it's a very tricky balance, and I really don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all answer for this country.
Well, there's not, and that was my next question, because Robert did say he's going to continue to grow until he gets his way.
Yeah.
When you say making the rules, he really is pushing for the national MLS, and he's going to do it by size. That was pretty clear. He said, "Look, I had to go. It's a little, you have to take everything that comes out of a CEO's word from their perspective, like." I don't think that's the only reason that Compass acquired Anywhere was to push on this. There were obviously lots of business reasons to do that, but it definitely has given Compass International Holdings a much larger voice in the conversation of listings and listing marketing and things like that. And and the thing is, there are some things that I think that Robert is not wrong about, in the sense that the conversation between the listing agent and the seller and what's good for that individual situation really does fall in the purview of the broker and the listing agent and their seller, and that's being balanced against the consumer and access to inventory and the ability to provide a good outcome for the majority of sellers. And I think there are certain sellers that absolutely, like if you're a celebrity, a high net worth person that you don't want to publicly market your home for a variety of reasons, you're a judge that has tried and convicted a lot of criminals. There's certain people for whom maybe public marketing isn't the right thing, but that doesn't mean for middle America that you may make a different choice in a more uniform market, where kind of like you have normal people selling normal homes and just wanting to get the most value out of it. Well, I want to talk about private listings exclusives coming soon. My question isn't, because it's here and it's not going anywhere at this point.
Yeah, it's here. It is here. Absolutely. 100%.
But the question is, when do the lawsuits start to take place where the consumer feels they were hurt and somebody is going to a class action lawyer, or you have small brokers that are saying, wait a minute, there's a restraint of trade here. I can't conduct my business as a boutique broker properly. When is this going to start to hit the market?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say. The difference I would say between the situation we're in now and where, let's just talk about the sellers for a minute. So the situation where we are now versus Sitzer Burnett and even some of the buyer lawsuits that's been settled recently by the National Association of Realtors is that we had potentially a real disclosure issue with talking about how the money in the transaction worked and who paid for what, and having that well understood or better understood by the seller up front. Even if they ended up paying all the fees, many of them did not understand the mechanics, and for sure a lot of the buyers. I mean, we did survey work on this. There was a lot of, when we studied this, there was a lot of buyers that had misconceptions, didn't understand how the money worked in the transaction, thought the services they were getting for free, or didn't understand they could negotiate the services. So there are some legitimate disclosure issues that I think Sitzer Burnett forced to the surface, and we can debate. There's a lot of debate around the business practice of the seller offering to pay for the buyer agent's commission and all of that, and we can have that conversation separately. But the point I want to make out is we didn't have a lot of maybe enough disclosure to protect the listing agent, the listing broker in that scenario. Whereas with the private listing networks, what's interesting now is Compass has a lot of disclosure language now that's pretty mature. So there's a little bit more of a moat being built around, like, hey, we have disclosed this. We did talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. We do have, and I've personally have listed and sold a property in the last 120 days with the agent that I've worked with for years, who happens to be at a Compass shop now via an acquisition. And so I saw the paperwork and I said, okay, well, this is pretty good disclosure in terms of saying what's going on. So on the seller side, I think we're in a different situation. So I don't know how the class action attorneys will look at that and say, well, this was disclosed, that if you have a limited exposure on the market. And then the other thing I'll add to that conversation, which is a real interesting twist, is they go, well, if we're going to expose it through a private listing network. Well, that private listing network now incorporates Redfin, which Redfin, that is a very large, very public website with a lot of traffic. So I'm struggling, and Gary Keller on our stage says, I'm really struggling with this word private. I don't understand how it's private when I can go to Redfin or I can go to compass.com and register an account and I can see everything that is in the private network. He's like, I think it's a misnomer. So, I think there's some claims of harm where you say, well, this has really harmed the consumer. The seller wasn't exposing, the property wasn't exposed to enough people. And I go, it was put on the number 3 website in real estate on the planet. How is that not a big enough pool to get the feedback and some level of exposure that's valid, and we can argue it's not on the number 1, and I get that that's an ongoing thing, but I think it's just the territory there is a little different because of the disclosure, because of the definition of private is a little broad in terms of the number of people that may see the homes. So I think on the seller side, that's interesting. On the buyer side, it's a different question. It's like, do we run into issues that buyers don't? I mean, for sure, we've made it harder for the poor buyer's agent and their buyer. Like, for sure, in markets where you have people that are going to say, well, I'm going to take these listings, I'm going to hold them on my website for 30 days, and then I'll put them in the MLS. Like, that mechanically makes the search harder. It just mechanically does. It means as a buyer's agent, I have to check the MLS. I have to check compass.com or Redfin. Maybe I have to check there's another broker. Maybe I have a Howard Hanna that also has a similar kind of program where I have to do different things now in order to find that inventory and satisfy the needs of my client on the buy side. And there may be something there where some attorneys may say, look at that and say, well, this is you're deliberately hiding inventory from a protected class, or there's some things there, and I don't have the pieces of the argument. I'm not an attorney and don't pretend to play one on television, but there may be a clever attorney that is able to piece together some degree of harm to a buyer because they were not able to see available inventory. But I'm unaware of any of that right now. The interesting part of it is we've had some states come in and say, Washington State and a few other states are passing legislation or have legislation in discussion that would say, look, if you are in an exclusive listing agreement, that property needs to be available to the public. It doesn't say in the MLS, it says available to the public. So at least they're starting to draw some boundaries around, like you need to expose it to the public for the public good is I think the call to action there. So.
Well, I think they're going to be, by the end of summer, 6 states. And from what I was told, there is a portal pushing the states, more and more states, to put this legislation in place. And so we're going to see what happens over the next 6 to 12 months. But by the end of the summer, we'll have 6. And then what happens by the end of the year, we'll see.
Just because I know we have practitioners here, I do want to say, like, I ran a brokerage. And we had a pre-MLS listing program back in 2010. And I had a Twitter feed, pre-MLS Austin, and we marketed things for a period of time before we actually put them into the MLS. And we marketed other people's listings for that. And I think there's a legitimate case to be made here, John, that there's some amount of flexibility that's appropriate for brokers to have to innovate and do neat, cool marketing stuff for their clients, right? We shouldn't get in the way of that. Innovation is the American way. And I think it's just one of these where each market is going to have to agree to kind of what the rules of the road are for, like, hey, here's what that looks like. You need to pre-register your listing with the MLS, even if it's not available for others or not in the IDX feed. You need to at least let the MLS know what's going on. And then, here's the rules of the road. And I think that's at a practitioner level. I think that's a real thing. I think we're going to have to figure it out.
Well, there's a lot of noise, and I want to move on from this in a moment, but we cannot allow our agents to lose focus on what their business is, and that's talking to their clients and talking to their sphere of influence, because there's too much information out there.
Yeah.
And that's concerning to me, that we have agents reading and making assumptions on what's happening and not paying attention to their business, their core business.
Yeah. Talk to your broker.
Yes.
talk to your broker, and brokers talk to your association MLS. And that's the thing, is that we need to follow whatever rules of the road there are. We need to follow them, and then if we're going to change the rules, we need to do it legitimately.
Exactly.
And have that discussion in the local marketplace and say, okay, what are the rules that as brokers and as agents that we're going to live by.
I have a question. You kind of teased me this morning that there was breaking news. Did that happen yet?
It has happened, in fact. So, John, as we discussed at our conference, one of the questions we asked to almost every speaker is, like, talk to us about what's happening with industry consolidation right now. And of course, we had Tamir Poleg on our stage, the CEO of Real Brokerage. He was on our stage on Thursday or Friday. I'm sorry, Friday. And we kind of knew something was going on. There were little buzz about there's something coming in the next week. And I will tell you this, I will not play poker with that man because he kept it. He was a great poker player. He did not tip any hand that was about to happen. And then we find out Monday morning that, Real has acquired Remax. And we did a whole webinar on it just 2 days ago. But so we just found out EXP is now in the game. So this broke literally 26 minutes ago that EXP has acquired NextHome, which is James Dwiggins' firm. And James and Keith and the executive team over there now is part of EXP as a franchise offering. And I actually spoke to James earlier today, and he kind of filled me in a little bit about that. They're going to keep the franchises staying together. It is a franchise offer as a standalone brand, similar to how Real is operating Remax, where they're not this isn't a conversion. They're not taking NextHome and converting it over to EXP. They are going to be running a franchise system in the context of the EXP World Holdings, and get access to things like technology, better pricing on a lot of the tools and services that they offer to their members already. So it's a move to give that franchise some more leverage for their franchise owners. So, but yes, that's big news. Not quite at the scale of acquisition of Remax, but those that are in the space and have been following James Wiggins and NextHome. It's a quality company, really great team over there. We've been to their conferences many times, and they do a great job. So congratulations to Leo and to James. It was great news for both of them.
It's a great leverage for them, and I actually copied and saved a post from James last night because something in his post I wanted to keep it, and so I have it here. And now his post makes sense. Yes. I had there's something that he and I were both going to be at, and I checked in with him. Earlier in the week, and he said, "Well, I don't know if I'm going to make it to that." So I'm pretty sure I know why that. Now I understand why. You know why. Yeah. Well, I want to ask a question. You don't have to answer it. And there are a number of questions I want to ask. Where does Berkshire Hathaway and Home Services sit with this? Because they are a large company. They've got a strong market cap.
Yeah.
You've got an owner that's aggressive in everything that he does.
That's true.
But they're quiet right now.
Yeah, I think that so Chris Kelly moved in the CEO role, fairly recently. He's been in it now for over a year, and they've made some big changes that aren't externalized yet in meaningful ways. And probably the biggest change is that if you talk to Chris, he'll say, look, we're moving from a hold company, which is what kind of the Berkshire Hathaway model is. Like, they buy a quality company, they leave the management, and they largely leave the company alone. They buy it, they provide it. There's some resources they provide to it, but they don't fundamentally come in and re-engineer its leadership team or do a whole bunch of changes. They buy quality companies, they're operating well, they help them operate better. That's been as a holding company. That's been what Home Services of America has been about. And then they've had a franchise offering, which is Berkshire Hathaway Home Services franchise. And so what his comment that is the thing to pay attention to is he says, look, we're moving from being a holding company to being an operating company. And Chris he's an operator. He was at Edina, he was at some other of the home services brands. So what they're doing is changing their posture from whole and operate, a bunch of largely, independent operating firms where they operate in their local market how they want, to okay, let's look at how do we negotiate better contracts for the entire group? How do we centralize our data? How do we put the organization on a footing that is a little more modern from an operator perspective? And so I think that's been that's a big task. And candidly, I think that Home Services can improve their net. They can improve their bottom line just by that. If they just focus on, hey, we're going to operate the existing business we have with greater efficiency, and we're going to reduce and eliminate redundant stuff, and we're going to look at where there's commonalities between all these brokerage companies that we own, they can save themselves a lot of money and really improve their operating performance substantially, and that will show up as actual net profit. So I think that's probably the story there. But they have been quiet. I mean, for a long time, it was Anywhere, Realogy, and Home Services that were the two big acquirers for a long time. And so Home Services has largely been quiet. I would not be surprised to see them return to that, acquisitive footing themselves at some point, because I don't think Chris was brought in just to do one job. I think he has growth as a job as well. I don't think it is simply take what we have and make it perform, incrementally better. Again, he's publicly traded CEO. He can speak for himself, but looking from the outside, I would say, I bet he has some growth goals that have been given to him by the board. Yeah. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see them re-enter the acquisition space in some meaningful way. But again, I'm now looking at a crystal ball. So, and Chris is not allowed to tell us things because, he's accountable to the SEC for public statements. So.
Yeah, and that happened a couple months ago, and it shouldn't have, that conversation that went public. So I can see where Chris is coming from. Well, let's shift a moment for the real estate professional out there who we have to pay attention. We've broken down our agents into a couple categories, and I know I have a group that I would call the employable agent, and that's age 18, 20 to age 45, where they would go out and find a career someplace else. And we have to focus on making sure that we help educate them on how to manage their real estate business and how to manage a side hustle. We know that we have to redefine full-time, part-time, and making sure that if somebody is committed to the business, committed to education, committed to their client, they can be doing something else and still have a highly successful career.
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out in the real estate industry with agents that are successful, committed, but still driving additional revenue?
Yeah, I mean, this is both. It's one of the great things about residential real estate as an industry is that we have opportunity for people that maybe have other work that they're responsible for, and so there's a lot of teachers and firefighters and other public safety people that have they do have spans of time where they can do work for clients in addition to their their regular work. And we have retirees. It's an incredible opportunity for retirees. I know that's out of the scope of your age range, but this is an industry where you can build a business until it gets to a point that it's doing enough where it can sustain me, and I'm going to focus on it 100%. Or in many cases, you can run it you can do it part-time because you have other obligations. Maybe you have family obligations, or you really like your other career. You've got something else that is more consistent in terms of your income, right? So I think that the thing to focus on, people in this industry love to beat up on the part-time agent, and I understand why that is. I think we need to shift our language from the part-timers to let's talk about professionalism. Let's talk about standards and service and the requirements for operating in real estate in a professional way. And I think that's the correct focus, because I will tell you, there are in our brokerage, we had some agents that were not full-time with us, but were very professional because we screened for those kinds of people. And for many of the clients, they were the perfect fit because they weren't under any pressure. This is an agent who they're doing it as an additional revenue stream. They're not under any pressure to close a deal to pay their mortgage or their light bill. And they could really they could spend a lot of time working with a client, and it was fine for them because they enjoyed the work. It was meaningful to them. They were helping a friend or a family member, and they maybe were willing to put in more hours than an agent who is just trying to close a certain number of transactions every year. Those are just different scenarios. And in some cases, the part-time agent is a great agent for the client because they're not in a hurry, right? They're like, I've got time for you, and we're going to do that. So, but it is something I think that every time there's a big change in the industry, a bunch of people go, oh, well, this is all the part-timers are going to get out. And I go, what are you talking about? By definition, they don't need the money, right? By definition. Yep. And the states have made it very easy to get licensed in real estate and have every reason to continue to do so. They want it to remain a more open career path to licensing. They're going to keep it open. So I think as an industry, we need to talk about how do we sustain or grow the level of professionalism of the entire agent body and have solutions for the people that are maybe in the industry to do 2 or 3 transactions a year, the same as the people in the industry to do 40 transactions a year. They have different needs. They have different needs, and they're not going. The part-time people are not going to go away because by definition they're not under pressure to go away, right? So we need to make it so where if they are going to be in the industry, they have the right tools and systems and compliance and accountability and training and all of those things. I think associations can play a strong role there, for some brokers, and I think some brokers can play a strong role there for those agents they're aware of that and do that. And you can have a very successful business where, we audit a lot of brokers' books. They're like, many of them, 3/4 of the people in their business are part-time, yep, or do less than the average number of transactions per year. So I just think that's the reality. That's just the business we're in. We have to learn how to up level those people so that they're doing the business professionally, because I don't see them all of a sudden going away, because why would they? by definition.
They don't have to.
They don't have to. They like the job.
Yeah.
They like the job. They're willing to pay the fees. They're willing to show up and do the stuff. Great, and I think that's the equal opportunity that this industry provides for so many people.
And my role as CEO is to create that value proposition and that foundation. I have 3 new hires here at GBBR that are absolutely phenomenal and very talented people. And one of the directions we're moving is a complete education division that is educating not just our members, but also the public, and we're educating students at the same time. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is partnering with the universities and the colleges nearby in a number of different categories. So, for example, we put on a forum for the county executive candidates last week, and we partnered with the university and the chambers and the home builders for this county forum, which is very important to Baltimore County. But we have to make sure that we look at all the stakeholders in the region that can provide value back to our members and help us drive the association moving forward, because we can't do it alone today.
Yeah, I think that's a great role for an association to take, especially that development piece. And then I would be remiss to not tie back to one of our talks at our leadership summit was about some of the demographics of agents and some of the shifts that we're seeing there. And and we've talked about this a couple of times, but every year the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals issues the NAHREP State of Hispanic Homeownership Report.
Yes.
And it has a future projection. And what was in this latest report was that 100% of new household formation in this country for the next decade is going to be in minority populations. It's going to be, and 70% of that is Hispanic. So there's a lot of new household formation there. We're going to maintain kind of the status quo with other demographics, and that is an area, that is a population. It's growing, and it is historically underserved and doesn't have home ownership at the level of other demographics. And so I think there's development. Like, I think as a broker, you should look at your community and say, who is underserved that could move into home ownership that would help me grow and develop the business? And that may show up in a variety of different ways. If you look in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, they have a Hmong population there and a large Thai population there. So there's certain areas where it's like there's growth categories that are opportunities for certain brokers. And that's where we have to look at how are we training and developing the next, the next generation of real estate professionals. The other piece we found is there's a lot of the people coming to the industry now, they really want to work in a team concept, or they want to work in a concept where they have access to opportunity. That's very important to them. And they have the kind of mentorship or apprenticeship in order to learn how to do the business properly. And I think that's great, by the way. That's like very, if you're running a team or a brokerage that provides business opportunities, referrals, leads, floor time, all those kinds of things, that means you have something that these new agents all want, and that you can then provide oversight and supervision and training and value to them that would justify a more, what we might call a more traditional compensation plan, to say, look, the brokerage is going to keep more because we're providing you with this opportunity and we're helping you learn the business at the same time. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity both for brokerages that are in that practice and teams to help nurture that next generation, of real estate professional. So.
I so agree with you, and part of that curriculum that we're creating is that Teams Academy that is going to be part of our education platform of step one, do I need a team, or do I need some type of administrative support? And if the answer is yes, I'm going to move into the team. How? How do I manage this team? Because you're really managing a mini brokerage without the brokerage. And so you still have to manage it the proper way. So we're going to create that curriculum and that outline to help our members do that if they choose, because not everybody should create a team. But those that do, we want to make sure they do it right and move it forward.
And there's some things that are very supportive, in terms of how teams operate. There's things that teams need that are maybe different from the individual agent, where they are like little businesses within the business. And for a lot of the people that run teams, I say, well, they're entrepreneurs, they're business owners. They just happen to be in residential real estate, and they're building a business inside of a brokerage umbrella that has a lot of its own business dynamics. And so many team leaders and teams, they need to learn those dynamics if you're going to have 5, 10, 15 people working for you.
Exactly. Jack, I appreciate so much of your time so far, and I just have a couple more questions. So
let's shoot. Let's do it.
Good. And if I'm crossing the line, tell me, because this is a line that is looking at the future of MLS, the future of associations, and the future of brokerage. And is there a position, a place for those three lines? And how do you see them competing, surviving, growing into the future? Because our world isn't changing, our world has changed. And when you look at the market cap companies out there that can make the change they want to make, how does that affect those three entities?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Some of these are conversations happening in the market right now, and so I can argue usually both sides of every argument about, or every debate or discussion about how things should work. Should we have a national MLS? Are we going to move to regionals? Do we keep everything local? We can debate all of those. But from a trends perspective, and we've been writing about the trends for 20 plus years now. Our trends report since 22nd edition this year, so we have a long history of studying this. The change is inevitable. And there are certain long-term trend lines that are true, which is consolidation, not just consolidation of brokerages, actual transaction consolidation is happening at a rapid clip. We were, 7 years ago, 45% of the sales volume in the U.S. was done by the top 1,000 companies. This last year it was above 65%. So we've 20% of the sales volume in the entire U.S. has been added into that top 1,000 brokerages, and so the bigger companies are gaining much more sales volume and much more market share. And you can see this with this, even this acquisition today. Large companies are consolidating, and so that is a trend. The other trend we see in brokerage is the virtualization of services and support and technology, where you would not open a brokerage today the way you opened a brokerage 25 years ago. No chance. 25 years ago, you would rent an office, you'd hire a front desk person, you'd sign up for the local MLS in whatever format that was offered. People would come in, they'd use your phones, they'd drink your coffee, they'd do all that stuff. You wouldn't do that today. You might be completely virtual. You might choose, as a person who might in the past have opened a brokerage where you got a group of people who want to work with you, you might say, you know what, I don't want the hassle or the liability of being a broker. I'm going to affiliate with a national brand like EXP or Real Brokerage or Aside if I want to control my branding more. Or there's a lot of options for you as a real estate entrepreneur that don't involve necessarily doing the things that we did 25 years ago. So I think that's unquestionable. And by the way, and we talked to a number of our leaders on stage at our leadership summit, and that was a consistent theme, is like brokerage, it's going to be centralized, nationalized, AI, data, services, all of that is going to be provided in a much more organized fashion than how we used to build brokerages in the past, where you had to, as a local broker, you had to hire staff. You had to go find the software and sign the contract for yourself, and you have very little negotiating power when you've got 20 agents. So it's all of that is beginning to shift and change because of the scale and because of the ability to operate in a digital environment so well. I mean, we have more national brokerages today than at any time in our history, and we will continue to have those. There's more national brokerage type companies being born every day. Whether it's like the Epic Realty is kind of next up, and the LPT is we had Robert Palmer on our stage. He said we're going to go public sometime soon. So that's the future of brokerage. Much more digital, data, AI, services, centralized support, value proposition directly to the agent, whether it's through a franchise network or through its direct brokerage. Like that's I think the franchise networks are going to be re-engineered in this concept as well, where the franchise networks have a lot more capability. Like the example I give is HomeSmart. They provide a lot more direct services capabilities to their franchisees. And there's other franchises that do as well, where they're like, oh, they really use a lot of these direct services as opposed to the broker having to they're just getting a brand and a logo and that's all. So that's changing. MLS and association, we're having similar changes. Consolidation MLS, we talked about it. That's going to continue. And I think the complexity of running a high quality data, data service, which is what an MLS is, and really serving the agents well and serving the brokers well. One of the biggest conversations is these national brokers, even the regional brokers, really have had no real stakeholder constituency with MLSs. And that's where a lot of the grief is coming from, is if I'm a national company and I have to have relationships with 300 MLSs that have different agreements, different input rules, different, everything's different. If I'm a regional company, like a Howard Hanna, I have relationships with 70 plus MLSs, and I can't get my data back out the same way. I'm having, so the national, this new constituency of national brokerages and big regional brokerages and, companies that are operating that way, the MLSs will have to adapt to serve those companies, because there's some markets where Compass Anywhere or EXP or one of those companies is a significant portion of the market, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're going to be, those big brokerages are looking at the MLSs and saying, actually, I know you guys think your subscriber is the customer, but we're your customer too. And the MLSs have to get smart about working with these larger companies and how can they make it easier to operate. And I think if they don't, those large companies are going to figure out something else.
Yes.
They're going to put together their own deal. So this is a real call to action in the MLS community of like, okay, we need to not just serve our local subscribers and their needs, but we need to look at these companies that have massive footprints and how we can work with them as well, because they're going to buy up a lot of your constituents, right? They already own a lot of your constituents in some markets. So it's really it behooves MLSs to figure that out. And sometimes that means like, hey, we should merge. Hey, we should make sure our rules are the same as all the counties around us. Make sure that we have the same compliance. Make sure things like that. Actually, I've interviewed a lot of brokers. That makes a big difference to them. Mm-hmm. So I think the MLS is going to have to figure that out. And then I think states and locals, I really think now is an interesting time, because NAR said, hey, we're stepping back a little bit from the rules enforcement and some of the value proposition. I think state associations have an enormous role that they can be playing right now, because practice in real estate is governed at the state level. When we've interviewed and surveyed, and we've in this opportunity report that I mentioned earlier, and in all of our conversations, everybody agrees that advocacy by the associations is very important. It is. No one disagrees with that.
Yes, it is.
It's the consistent thing. They may say, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like, you guys provide too much technology, it competes with the technology my broker provides, or I don't like it, you do this, and da-da-da-da. But you get to advocacy and everybody's like, that's it, that's the thing we all agree on, right? Mm-hmm. And right now, I think state associations are in a great position to advocate for more home ownership, for easing the rules for housing in their local communities, same as local associations. So there's a lot of things in the advocacy and governmental affairs where I think there's a strong value proposition there. The other thing that's a strong value proposition, again, we've talked to a lot of brokers and associations and work that we do, and the support for kind of professional standards. And that's, again, I think you bring that to a group of brokers and they go, yeah, that's good. We will enforce our compliance rules, but we don't want to be the bad cop all the time. We don't want to be the person that handles the complaints or the agent-to-agent behavior stuff. Like, we really like having the state or a big local or somebody that's not us going to that agent and slapping their wrist, right? So I think there's some real value proposition there, and then all the supportive things, that education to professional standards and kind of caretaking of the local real estate community and practice that the local associations can do. But if we're still tied, and John, you've been in this game a long time, there's a lot of associations that if they didn't have the MLS, they just fall right over, right? Yep. There's not doing anything outside of that. And I think that mindset, that attitude, that's over. Like, that is not. It's not going to survive what's coming, and because what's happening is the bigs are going to say, hey, if you're going to make our lives difficult, big brokers, if you're going to make our lives difficult, we're just going to do our own thing. We're going to take 50% of your listings, and we're going to go put them in this other thing over here. And I'm sorry, game over. game over when that happens. So I think these are some of the things that the associations and MLSs need to address head on. And we think at T3, we work with this constituency. There's a lot of opportunity to continue to create value for members. You just can't be complacent right now. You have to go after it. You have to define it and prove it and put it in front of your members and communicate it and make sure that the wins are known. That's so important. So important with how noisy everybody's lives are right now.
Well, the words complacency is music to my ears because we have to look to 2030. I have to pay attention to and advocacy. Our lobbyists that we work with, and we're restructuring our government affairs division here, really focusing on public policy, legislative, our PAC, our GPAC, which is our local PAC, and working very closely because Baltimore, for example, is a unique situation because the city itself, it does not sit in the county. Then you have Baltimore County, and you have the county council and the city council. And it's extremely important that we are paying attention to home opportunities, housing opportunities. And so the advocacy part of this, and this is where, Jack, it's so important that, and I did this up in Canada, in Ontario, where we build a relationship with the university. And I turned my education over to the college and to let them help us write our curriculum and train our trainers, looked at our hospitality, helping us run our events and do our research. We did that massive study with a couple of professors from Pepperdine, and Davin is now at Notre Dame. And they were able to get a federal grant and do a deep dive into the real estate industry in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's where we have Johns Hopkins here. We have University of Maryland. And so we have to tap into those resources to bring that information back.
What's interesting, John, is that as I've kind of matured in my career in the industry as a consultant, because I came from broker and franchise world, I could care less about what the government was doing at that point. I was like, we're making money, we're focused on our agents, we're doing that kind of stuff. But as I've matured in my career and am now having conversations with policy people, with think tanks, with people that control, how mortgages are done in this country, how financing is available, how we spend a quarter of the cost of a new home is in regulatory stuff. Is related to regulatory. We can't spend almost $100,000 on regulatory stuff in order to build a home. The builders have to price it too expensive, so it just quashes the affordability and first-time home buyer, which we have to have that first-time home buyer to keep the entire ecosystem healthy. You've got to be growing the first step in the ladder. So, and that's an area where I think the association, again, can play an incredible role and actually create more opportunity for their members to help people with home ownership and to keep the local real estate economy healthy, because real estate is the core. I'm so passionate about it. It is the core of wealth in the United States and in North America broadly. I mean, it is the thing. When you find people who've built wealth over their lives, they have real estate, and it is the thing that we want to continue. That's not the same everywhere. It's not the same worldwide. A lot of people rent their whole lives. You talk to people in France; they're in a 99-year lease. It's like that's a different story. But here, to build wealth, it's real estate, and I believe to build a healthy community. I think you can look at all the studies, like to have healthy, thriving communities. Getting people in home ownership is maybe your most important lever for that. Question. And I think that's something that I'm looking for things everybody can agree on and say, let's go do that. And we're doing some work at T360 around this particular issue, and you'll likely see it in the upcoming trends report, because it's amazing to me. There's been a lot of work done. What we need now is action. And I think action comes from that government affairs work, that lobbying work, even that local work, even in your local city council saying, hey, what are we doing to make it less risky and easier for home builders to build the inventory that we need? And I think those are real powerful roles for associations to take again. And I think everybody gets behind that. They'll write a check. They'll write a check for that all day long.
We interviewed a candidate for county council. He's 41 years old. Yesterday we interviewed him, and he can't buy a home yet. And it struck a chord with him right there.
Average age of the first-time home buyer is 43.
Yeah.
43. Yeah. That is not working, guys. We have real work ahead of us here. And, I know many people listen to this podcast are saying, how, help me make more money. But I'm talking about, this is a big picture issue that we need to be educated and informed about, so that when we talk to representatives, when we vote, when we lobby, that we're asking for the right outcomes, which is lowering the cost of home building and making it easier to get mortgages, making it easier to get loans for people that are taking that first step in the housing ladder. Super important.
Well, we're bringing that to the table in September with our state of Baltimore, and the economists that we're bringing in will help spell that out. We're going to have a panel of builders and developers talk about this, but I'm also going to bring in a gentleman by the name of Kenny McDonald. Kenny was the CEO of One Columbus, and he just recently left to start his own consultancy, but he was focused directly on all the growth in Columbus, and I think they're the number 2 city in Site Selection Magazine, one of the top growth communities in the United States, of driving jobs, driving that relationship between city government, the private sector, the real estate community, the data, and the number of jobs, 10 to 20,000 new jobs coming into Columbus, and the construction that's going on in that region. It's funny. I want to just bring up one question for you, but it comes back when I was running Coldwell Banker in Canada. We opened up a real estate franchise on Vancouver Island. We had a time where we didn't have a presence there, and the brokers were friendly to us, but they didn't want to affiliate. Right. And after about 6 months, we were going home one day, hop on the airplane, and I canceled my flight because I went across the street to this large hardware lumber company called Slag Lumber. And they had 10 superstores in British Columbia. And 6 months later, not only did Ron Slag buy the Coldwell Banker franchise, but he built a Coldwell Banker office in his flagship store. Because he even said, he goes, John, I've got 10 stores. I have 15,000 consumers a day coming in and out of my stores buying something for real estate.
Yeah.
And he bought a Dominion lending franchise and put that in the store. And he goes, look, I have 1,000 employees. Look at all the builders that are buying from me. And so when we look at the business of real estate, it is affecting the economy. It's affecting local growth, transportation, housing issues. But I heard on stage at the summit, and I think Gary said it and even Damon said it, the process of the buying, selling process is broken.
Yeah, a few people made that point. I think it is in some ways it's harder today because of the income requirements and because of the affordability. So I think that was the comment, and I mean Varun also from Rocket said, "Hey, it's broken right now. If we can't have people we can get into homes, that's the issue." Now, it's not entirely an issue that's in the hands of the broker or the agent community, but we have influence, we have power in terms of making things better, and we should. And there's some things that, by the way, we could advocate for that would create a lot of inventory from existing inventory that would be in the affordable category. You don't have to build it all. 85% of single-family rentals are owned by mom and pops, and most of those are baby boomers. And there's some things we can do around tax incentives in selling those to first-time home buyers that could create a lot of inventory that, by the way, needs to be fixed up. It'll spur on local spending in all the in the Lowe's and the Home Depots and all that kind of stuff. Because when people buy their first home, they make improvements. They come in and they paint and they put in flooring and they do all the things that you do. And we have a lot of that inventory that could be activated under some form of tax policy that makes it a little easier to sell it, right? So I think that there's things that can be done, and we're going to be doing some work to educate about that in the domains that we're in. And again, I'm having a lot of meetings I wasn't having 5 years ago, where I'm like, I'm talking to people who are experts in mortgage finance and construction and things like that, because what I've seen is this is the area where we can fix that. It has downstream effects where the entire industry wins. It's great for us. So, well, this is a terrific conversation, John. We've really covered a lot of turf here.
We did, and I'm going to say thank you, Jack. And if there's any last words you'd like to share with us. And then I greatly appreciate this. And I look forward to the summit coming up and the opportunity report. But anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I've got two things. One is, don't miss the opportunity in this market. We're in the fourth year of a real estate recession. So I know a lot of people are just like, oh, when is this going to be over? Now is the time to build. It's the time to build. It's time to have conversations that maybe aren't possible. When the market's good and you're trying to build something, people are like, leave me alone, I'm busy making money. Right now, you can form partnerships, you can acquire companies, you can fold ins, you can do there's all kinds of things. Don't miss the opportunity there. Don't miss the opportunity with AI. AI is a huge opportunity right now. We're doing so much with it in our business, and I know many. Get connected, mastermind, talk to people. Every day, I'm watching agents and brokers every day change their business with artificial intelligence, not just with a vendor tool, but just learning enough about it to apply it into their lives. It's going to make us all, the agents that use and the brokers that use AI are going to be the ones that survive. So those are kind of my calls to action. Don't miss this moment. It's a special moment in time of change for our industry, and you can create your whole future career out of this moment and create a lot of enterprise value or a lot of value for yourself, a lot of income for yourself as we move back into a more regular market. So don't miss it. And then the last thing I'll say is I'll invite all listeners. We are having a new conference called The Edge. It's a tech and data forum. It is in Dallas, October 27th and 28th. We've done a tech event every fall for the last 5 years. We've tweaked this a little bit. If you want to be up to date on tech, data, AI, kind of what's happening, this is the event for you. We have a show special for that right now for May, which I will send you and you can put in the show notes. It's $200 off registration. And we're at a great facility. It's it's a fly-in facility. You don't even have to, it's right next to the airport, very easy to get to. We're making this a highly accessible event. And John, you've been to our events before. We really focus on great content for everybody. And I want everybody that comes to this, they walk away with a plan for their business for how to use AI and technology and how to make their business more productive. And it's not just for nerds and geeks, it's for regular folks too. Like we've focused on making the content very accessible. So October dates, and then we'll send you there's a special code for people that register in the month of May.
Wonderful. So, we'll make sure that we promote this, and I know Chris is sitting there shaking his head. Yes, he wants to go to it. So
it's going to be a great show.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show. So, all right, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Jack, great seeing you. Thank you so much for your time and great conversation.
You bet. Take care, my friend.
Bye.